Testimony Tuesday with Doug Keck. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Doug Keck, President and Chief Operating Officer of EWTN. He's a Catholic husband and father and the host of the long-running show EWTN Bookmark. Doug Keck, welcome to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you on. So we always begin at the beginning with Testimony Tuesday. What was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
I grew up I was born in the mid-50s, so I lived through the mid-50s into the 60s, so I saw a lot of changes. I grew up on Long Island, and I would say semi-idyllic childhood in the sense of growing up on Long Island in the late 50s and early 60s was really, really nice. A combination of being sort of out in the country, but yet metropolitan, right near the city. I had a couple of great parents. I had a great neighborhood with a lot of great kids, and we had a great time. And overall, I was very, very lucky. About the only downside I really had in my life was that my mother was chronically ill, and so we had to deal with that in our lives. But I guess that kind of taught me a little bit of dealing with issues, and that everything's not perfect, but as the kids next, just growing up, I mean, I'm always amazed at what great childhood memories I really have, and how nice it was for us. And I really feel bad for so many people today who have the world kind of thrust upon them. As a kid, even growing up in New York, you always kind of felt like everything was happening to you. Whatever's happening in the world was happening to you because you lived in New York, but not with the kind of oppressive media everywhere you turn imagery that, and connectivity that you have today. So there was a much more time to be a child and to have a pastoral existence of playing, touch football or playing baseball or army or, Little League and things like that, CYO, those kinds of things that were, it was great to grow up where I grew up, and I wouldn't change it at all. I was lucky.
Wow. Yeah, sounds wonderful. What was it like in terms of the faith at that time? Or was it a Catholic family? Were you going to a Catholic parish? Were you baptized as an infant? What do you recall growing up in terms of the faith?
Sure. Well, my mom was Catholic. My dad was Lutheran. He never converted, but my mother was very Catholic. Catholic in the sense that we went to Mass on Sundays and things like that. It was not a house filled with images from the faith or praying the rosary every night or those kinds of things. So I didn't really have that background. We didn't have priests who were friends. My brother wasn't an altar boy, so I never became an altar boy. So I used to kid and say, I was voted least likely in my high school to work at EWTN. But kind of a thing, because I really didn't have that kind of a background. And I went to public school initially. My brother was in Catholic school because back in the day, in the late 50s, early 60s, couldn't get in. They built the schools, but there was no room because of the baby boom, and there was so many Catholics on Long Island. Half of the population in the two counties were basically Catholic. You had a large Jewish population, and the vast majority after that was Catholic. So it was a lot of fun, ethnic groups and stuff. A lot of great senses of humor, or humor emanates from New York. And so it was kind of like that. I went to public school originally. We moved to Florida for a few months to see if it would help my mother's faith. It didn't. Actually went to St. Margaret Mary's in Winter Park for about 3 months. And then we came back, and when we came back, I was old enough to go to grammar school, but there was no place in St. Pius X, which was our parish school. So I went to Parkway School in Plainview up until about I guess it was the very beginning of the 5th grade when my mother announced, much to my dismay, that Father O'Mara had called up and said, "Oh, guess what? There's a slot in your school at St. Pius." So I have to admit, it wasn't something that I was looking forward to. My brother was going there, so it wasn't a big problem. But I was having a fine time in the school I was going to with the kids I had been going to school with for several years. So in 5th grade, I made the transition over to Catholic school, and then I graduated from that grammar school, and I followed my brother to Holy Trinity Diocesan High School in Hicksville, right next to Billy Joel's house. It's about 2 blocks from the back of my high school. A lot of his songs were written around things that happened around my high school, actually. Things like the Village Green and those Catholic girls who start much too late. So it was kind of a great time to go to a Catholic high school. There was a lot changing. I mean, to go back to, growing up early on, listening to the film strips with the records with the little beeps and the nuns changing us, telling us about Adam and Eve. And then, one day Melchizedek showed up and I said, well, who's this guy? I never heard of him before because, we were learning the Baltimore Catechism and then a council happened. So you kind of heard about the council. And then being in Catholic grammar school, being taught by nuns, you saw the changes in front of you because the habits changed, the focus of the teaching changed, and that just continued on through high school where by the time I guess I graduated, probably the Mercy Sisters, probably almost all of them didn't wear a habit. Maybe they wear the veil. The Dominicans held on longer, but so I saw those changes, the guitar mass and the Sons of God and all those kinds of things. As a kid growing up, some of that was fine and nice because it was different and, a little more relaxed. Clearly in the early days when you were a little kid going to the Latin Mass, unless you were reading along in the Missal, you didn't know for the most part what was going on or what was happening. And of course, back then there was no air conditioning, and there actually was the church was packed. And so in the summer, it was it could be quite an experience at church. But yeah, it was packed. There were so many Catholics. It really did look like it was this unbelievable, springtime in the church in the late 50s and into the early 60s. And but the world changed, and the church, had to adapt with that. And there were impacts, some positive and some negative, obviously, that I think we're still dealing with today.
Yeah. So, it would have been a very tumultuous time in the culture. I guess that maybe would have hit maybe when you were in high school or so. Vietnam, the sexual revolution, the music, everything that was kind of in upheaval. What was that like? What do you remember there? And then, leading into your college years, if you could share a little.
Well, I would say, obviously the council, you figure around 64, 65, I was basically grammar school then and middle of grammar school. And that's when you started to see the changes. And obviously 68, we had 67 was the summer of love. 68, 69, you're dealing with Woodstock, you're dealing, which happened in New York. So I knew some guys who actually went there. And there was that happening. You had, like you said, the Vietnam War, the draft. And so my brother was 3 years older than me. So he was somebody who would be closer to draft age by 1970. And so there was, everybody was concerned about that. And there were obviously riots. First you had the Watts riots and those kind of race riots that happened. And then you had Martin Luther King and Kennedy, and you had Wallace. And, when you talk to people who didn't live through it, you think the country's coming apart now. You should have lived then. Really, in the late 60s, it really did seem like everything was like falling apart between the war, the pushback against the war, and just all the other tumult that was going on. And it was tough because, the changes in the church were the same kind of things. People had been used to a certain level of stability in the church. And now it seemed like everything was, whether it was or it wasn't, it appeared to be up for grabs. And depending on who you were talking to, do we do this? We don't have Friday anymore, so you don't have to worry about that. So if they can change that, what else can they change? Oh, limbo's closed. There's no limbo. So I think it rattled a lot of people. And obviously the changes in worship, some called for by the council, some not called for, but yet instituted by people with their own ideas. Many times, I caused a lot of people, that kind of confusion, because they were used to things being a certain way. And then they seemed like they changed. And not only did they change, but they changed with rapidity. We went from Baltimore Catechism to string paintings and collages. And so that was a big change for everybody.
Yeah, I was a little bit after that, so I caught kind of the tailwinds of that growing up in the 80s and early 90s. But yeah, it's very fascinating to hear what it would have been like actually growing up, coming to age during that time. Where did you end up going to college?
I went to a wonderful school called the New York Institute of Technology. I always kid and say, you've heard of MIT, it's NIT. But that's a joke. It was a computer media school. But it wasn't a big school, but it was local, and my brother was taking computer courses there. My parents were moving to Arizona for my mother's health, and I wanted to stay in New York because my girlfriend was here. And somebody said, "Well, you ever think of radio or TV or one of those things?" Because I did a show in high school, and people thought, "Oh, maybe you could do something like that." And so I went there because they offered TV and radio.
Great. Yeah, we're blessed to have Doug Keck with us, and we're going to get more from Doug when we get back. And just always great, always on holy ground when we hear someone sharing some of their faith testimony, some of their story. We're real blessed to have Doug with us and his willingness to share with us today. We're going to be back with much more in just a moment. Stay tuned.
iCatholic Mobile is a proud sponsor of the Station of the Cross. Solid connections, reliable data. That's iCatholic Mobile, a 5G wireless provider dedicated to your faith and values. Enjoy unlimited talk and text, dependable coverage nationwide. And every plan has unlimited data and free roaming in Canada and Mexico. iCatholic Mobile, the service that connects you to what matters most. More info at iCatholicMobile.com.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. We're blessed to have Doug Keck with us, President and COO of EWTN, sharing some of his personal testimony here with us today. Doug, we left off in your college years at NIT, studying some media. And what else would you like to share with us during that time? Was your faith strengthening? Any seeds planted? Any big moments that you recall? What comes to mind?
Well, I guess, I was kind of like a Catholic who kind of went to Mass. I was lucky because I started dating a girl at the very end of high school, who's my wife now, and she was always much more oriented towards, as most girls tend to be, at least it used to be that way with the faith, to kind of be like, well, we got to go to Mass, we still got to go to Mass. And so I was always open to going to Mass. But I have to admit, wasn't a priority for me. And I was living in a fraternity house, which is the last place that most people spend a lot of time thinking about getting up early on a Sunday morning, which is why vigil masses came in quite handy in around the time that I was going out. And 18 years old was the drinking age in New York at the time. So once you were basically out of high school, you could go to bars and places like that, and so that was the way the world was at the time, and that would have been in like 1973 and things like that, and for a rock and roll fan of a lot of great music, a lot of great concerts. I always explained it as kind of being like, people ask me, it's not like a lot of us walked away from the church. We kind of drifted down the river with the rest of the flotsam and jetsam, and just kind of, because, you'd get kind of if you don't get anything out of Mass, you don't really have to, then maybe you shouldn't go. Sister Mary Feelgood would tell somebody that while she was tuning a guitar, or whatever. You'd get this very kind of experiential, which we're living with today. But these were the early days of kind of that, that it's what you're getting out of Mass rather than what you're obligated to do or putting into it. And which is why I think the church became very circular in the sense of very I, me, and me and God, rather than my worshiping of God. But and so I kind of survived that period of time, as a Catholic, and certainly I always thought of myself as a Catholic. I would say that at that time I wasn't. 1973 is also a big year, because that was when Roe v. Wade was passed, and abortion was already available in New York, and in a lot of states it actually was already. So that got passed, and I remember them having a debate in my religion class about it. And most people were kind of like that's sold, and a lot of stuff got sold as a bill of goods back in the 60s, which was, basically, well, why should somebody have their whole life ruined for one mistake? And, they have to do, and it's just a bunch of cells, and it's not really, baby, and, that kind of a thing. And so it played on the idea of saying, yeah, well, that's not fair, that person, and it's not really a child, because, it's just a clump of cells. I mean, the famous Phil Donahue did that on one of his TV shows to show you it was just a clump of cells. And that's what people believed. And then I guess at some level wanted to believe because it made it easier. But there was a lot of things like that, having to do pornography. Well, if you let people have these things, then they'll leave other people alone. You know what I mean? They won't bother other people, or, everything, this kind of liberty, kind of exaggerated liberty or freedom, thinking that freedom means you do whatever you want to do and that's going to make you happy, when that's not at all. Your freedom is to do what God wants you to do. That's really what your freedom is, and that's what makes you happy. But you have to go through that a lot of times to kind of come into those realizations. But, you get a kind of libertine existence, really, where people were taught, well, if you do this, it'll make it better for people. And, people are unhappy in a marriage. Well, then, why shouldn't they be able to? Should their whole lives be ruined because they made a mistake when they were too young, or these kinds of things, or contraception? Well, you don't want people to not be able to have the unity in the marriage and build that closeness because they're afraid of having too many kids too soon. So these are the kinds of messages that, really inculcated and populated the media in those days. And that's why so many times you'll find people in my age bracket, the baby boomers bracket, who, a lot of the gray-haired people like me now, who still kind of buy into some of these things, or you still hear them. Thank goodness the truth attracts, and young people are attracted to the truth, and they're the ones who are revitalizing the church right now.
Yeah, thanks be to God. So I've heard you mention the impact of a marriage encounter retreat that you went on. What happened during that experience? When did it happen, I guess? Was it long after college? And how did that change your spiritual life?
Sure. Well, I graduated college in 77, and my wife and I got married in 79, St. Ignatius in Hicksville, and we had been going out for, I guess, by then, about 6 years. We got married there, and I was working. I had started working at a cable company. I was actually working a couple of jobs. One, I was doing radio for a local radio station, and then I got hired full-time to be an announcer and the assistant promotion manager at a cable company run by Cablevision on Long Island in 1976, and was started by a guy named Charles Dolan, who was the founder of HBO and was really a genius and one of the great visionaries of media today, what you see in media today, let alone the cable industry. And I really learned a lot from being able to work underneath him and with the vision that they had. So I worked on a bunch of the regional sports channels and other things like that. And in 1980, we launched Bravo and something called Escapade. And then Escapade, which kind of was, an adultish channel, not the way they talk about it today. But, I mean, our channel wasn't any worse than what HBO is now. But so we launched that, and then we got in partnership with Playboy. And so we launched Playboy and Escapade in 81, and then the Playboy Channel. And so for a number of years, along with several other things, I was working on the Playboy Channel at the same time I was working on the launch of the Vision Interfaith Satellite Network out of New York. So that was kind of interesting, working through our playback facility. You could go from one set of images to another. And so I had done that, and I'd been in the operations side. I went sports programming. I got to work with the New York Yankees. I was a diehard Yankee fan. I worked with the Mets. I worked directly with Mickey Mantle on coordinating his schedule when he was announcing for us. I got to meet a lot of famous ball players, including hockey, for people, hockey fans, Islanders, and people like that, because we dealt with the Nets and the Devils and the Yankees and the Mets. So Mel Allen, the famous announcer, and people like that I got to know and work with, and it was interesting. But we were kind of drifting along, and then in 1986 we were able to finally have our first child. We had to go through some things to get there. Unfortunately, my son Matt, and we didn't realize, but it took a couple of years to realize that Matt was autistic, and so high functioning, but autistic, and so that put my dreams away about him playing for the Yankees or a lot of the other things. My autograph book from Mickey Mantle to him, Matt could care less Probably would have been more enthused if it was Mickey Mouse who signed it. So these kind of things, I think, started to make me realize, and when you have a special needs child, I think it helps you to realize, or if you're dealing around, and I had somewhat with my mom with suffering, you start to learn that a lot of the things that the world teaches you or tells you are important really aren't that important, and that you really can see that Catholic understanding of suffering and someone struggling, and the love and the kinds of things that grows out of that, and what you learn from that. And so in the late 80s, friends of ours, a girl we had gone to high school with, who I hadn't seen in a couple of years, invited us to their house for their 10th anniversary. They were getting remarried again. And we're like, what? Last time I'd seen the husband and her, he was trying to figure out how to break the bank at Monte Carlo. He had some kind of scheme for winning at craps. And I was like, what? What are they doing now? And we go there, and it was a marriage encounter-like thing. And, they were saying our Father, and it was kind of like, oh, and we were kind of impressed and interested. And then she sent the thing to my wife saying, well, gee, you deserve it. Why don't you go, on a marriage encounter? And so she said, well, let's do this. And I said, well, that sounds great. I'm good at pontificating over Brie and Shepley. I guess I got a lot of ideas and theories about things I can talk about, but anybody who's been on a weekend knows has nothing to do like that with that. It's a very private weekend, and you're not talking to anybody except your spouse. And so that kind of kicked off our, or revitalized our spirituality, realizing, as Sheen would say, God in marriage takes three. You need God at the center. And after that, I got invited to go on a Cursillo, and the Cursillo kind of made me realize that's the image I always had, was standing in a darkened room and then letting the shade up and realizing, it's light outside. It's always been light outside, but I closed the shades. God hadn't turned off the sun. I just closed the shades, and all I needed to do was open up the shades, and he was there. And if I was to listen, I would get some direction, and I actually got some specific direction later, because in between, while we were doing that, I started watching EWTN, and I wasn't a big Mother Angelica fan. I was really a Father Groeschel and a Father Rutler fan, and they used to be on at night, so I used to videotape it overnight, and then in the morning I would dub off the audio onto cassettes, and when I was working around the house or in the yard, I would listen to the tapes, and that's kind of how I became, as Scott Hahn used to talk about, the old days of the tapeworms. I was a tapeworm, and I would listen to tapes, and then I'd order tapes from EWTN or any other conference, Steubenville or others, and I really became self-taught that way. So that's kind of how we got involved with that, and we got asked to be a team, which is a presenting couple, and we also did PR, so we actually were on Fox TV in New York talking about it. Once there used to be a show called The God Squad that a priest and a rabbi did out of New York, Tom Hartman, and Rabbi Gelman, and we were on that show promoting marriage encounter back probably in the early 90s, probably.
Wow. Doug Keck is with us and sharing some of his personal testimony. So yeah, this seems like quite a turning point, a strengthening point. Do you recall on the Cursillo, was there a moment like going to, did you have a powerful confession? Was there anything further there? I guess we'll hold it over till the break, and we'll get Doug's response when we get back. But yeah, so much that I'd love to inquire about, but whatever Doug wants to share with us, we will hear it when we get back from the break. And as we head into the break, maybe to reflect on your own story, your own life, and those moments that you perhaps have had. Maybe this is a moment for somebody right now as you're listening, and you can sense that the Lord is knocking on your heart, saying, "Hey, open up the shades. I'm here. I want to come in. Open those shades up and let me in." And so we all have more to go. And so it's conversion, initial conversion, ongoing conversion, all the way into eternity by God's grace for His glory. And so let us thank and praise God as we head into the break for all that He is up to, all that He is doing. We're going to be right back with more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Doug Keck, our guest today. He's president and COO of EWTN, sharing some of his personal testimony on this Testimony Tuesday on The Simple Truth. Doug, when you went to that Cursillo that you mentioned, was there a powerful experience of the sacrament of penance, confession, a great reconciliation experience there? And you mentioned that going forward from there, that you became more involved then as a leader in the marriage encounter and a promoter of it as well. How else were you changed going forward from that Cursillo retreat?
Again, I thought the best part of the Cursillo was it was a lot easier than being in a marriage encounter, because at night you got to talk to God as opposed to your wife. And so I thought that because your wife talks back, and our Lord, he doesn't talk back as quick or as loudly, at least initially. So I'm just kidding. But I remember that. I'm thinking about that and got to read some books and look at things. I think, that, again, the thing that struck me was that, if something I believed was true, then it was always true. In which case, kind of the idea, Sister Bridge McKenna would say, with her conversion, or not conversion, but in a sense, her miracle of it saying, it's all true. Everything I learned as a kid is actually true. All these things I heard about and things, Jesus really was the Son of God. Mary is still up in it, these kind of things. Mary did appear in Fatima. That was one of my favorite books when I was a kid. So I'm always still a big fan of Fatima. And so I think the biggest thing I learned from that, not only is it all true, but to be more active in my own private life of making sure I was raising my family that way, and where I could do my bit in the church. I became, for the sake of argument, became a lector, kind of a thing. And was working through the marriage encounter, helping out with that until, I kind of got notified that God had something else in mind for me and my wife and our family.
Yeah. Share more about that, and I guess in particular, were you experiencing any sort of challenge from the Lord based on just the work that you were doing? Some of it being maybe morally objectionable, being involved with the Playboy Channel and some things like that. Was some of that bothering you at that point, or was there a decision to be made? Was anything stirring up along those lines?
Well, I was lucky by the time I the timing of the Lord was perfect. I wasn't directly involved, and they had moved their operation to the West Coast. So I wasn't really dealing, luckily, with anything of any, that was a big problem. The other channel which I worked on and launched, which was dear to my heart, was American Movie Classics, because I'm an old movie buff. So that was something I really enjoyed working on, but it wasn't really anything by then. We were doing some shopping services, some other things, cable on-demand channel kind of a thing, some new technologies that GI was working on at the time. And so, and I was working as well in the operations field and studio production. I'd launched a show in New York Sports, which was called New York Sports Nightly. So if that sounds like EWTN News Nightly, that's not a coincidence that those names are similar. Since I worked on the launch of EWTN News Nightly as well later in my career. But I really didn't have too much really by then. It was I wasn't doing anything that was really problematic. It really was just the idea of starting to feel like I was being pulled to do something more. And I had a pretty dramatic experience where Terry was working on the weekend, and I don't know if I had both kids with me. Maybe I did. And I had just gone in the car and drove out further on the island, close to where some of my other friends from marriage kind of lived, and thought, well, we can move out here. These houses are a little bigger, they're a little nicer. I was doing well by then. I was vice president, then I was a senior vice president of technical services for the network. So I had a pretty good job It was a company that was very family-oriented in a way, that if you had been there a long time and you were one of the early people and you were loyal to the Dolan family, they took care of you. You were seen as an extended member of the family. They always treated you that way. It was very nice. But I was coming back from looking, and I walked into the door of my house, and it was put on my heart, however it was done. I have different memories of how it was. That just said, a job will become available that does not pay a lot of money, but you'll want to take it, and you need to save your money. And I said, okay. And I told my wife, this is, kind of what I got. And so that's what we did. And then slowly over that, we found ourselves kind of in a kind of disconnecting locally with the other things we were doing, kind of backed out of marriage account a little bit. I found myself looking at maps of Irondale, Alabama, of all places. And and I had already had some contact with EWTN in the 90s because working in the cable business, and they were in the cable industry, I would go to the big conventions, and a couple of times I went and looked to see if they had a booth. Did they have a booth or anything? And so I made some connections with some people, and I had a chance to go and visit the operation. And I thought, well, maybe when I retire or something, it's something I could do. But the Lord had different timing as to what he wanted me to do. And so with being yanked down there, and probably took me a couple of years really to make the transition. I didn't really tell too many people because they thought I was crazy. One of my old buds said, "Can't you do this stuff on the weekend? What are you doing?" And it was a major shift for my autistic son. It was a major shift for my wife's family, especially. They were more on Long Island. I didn't have a lot of family on the island anymore. In fact, my brother had moved to Florida before that. But it was a big move, and it's a culturally different situation, though Alabama's a wonderful place to live in, a very Christian kind of environment. It's God has been very good to us. But it was a big situation. It was a big financial haircut. But again, God is good. I'm not complaining. I've done quite well in my life. But that was kind of like the kind of the thing that propelled us coming to EWTN. And I was lucky because in a sense I had done voiceover work for commercials. I had been a disc jockey. I had been a newscaster. I worked in sports production. I worked television operations, satellite distribution. I worked in news, worked on the launch of several news channels and other channels. And so I had a really pretty broad background that I thought I could bring to a smaller organization with bringing some of the benefits of having worked with some top people in the industry.
Yeah, wonderful. And so when you went down there, do you have a story of when you first met Mother Angelica? Was she responsible did she have to give the okay on hiring you? Anything surrounding
Absolutely. Well, the first time I met her, actually, I'm trying to remember. The first time I actually met her was the time I flew down. I was at a convention in New Orleans, and I took a flight over, and I got a little tour, and that was the first time I was at EWTN, kind of I wanted to see what it looked like, what was going on. Reminded me at the time of what upstate New York looked like. It's kind of how I described the area at the time. It's much more built up now, even there. When the sisters were living there, obviously this is when the sisters, were at where the network is, because that's obviously the network was built where the sisters' cloister was. And then obviously Mother in the late 90s and, 2000, you have the Hansville and the shrine, the Blessed Sacrament being built. So that happened then, but at the time they were still there. And so I met Mother and, just hello and stuff. I'm trying to remember I can't say that it was, it was exciting. Oh, there she is. And actually I was more excited because there was a priest from New York who I thought was terrific, a Monsignor Bill Smith, who died way too early, who I quote often on different things, but he was a classic truth-telling, sarcastic New York priest, which fit right into my view of the world as a New Yorker. We're not shy. It's kind of an interesting mix when you get down to dealing with people from the South, especially even just going back 30 years now. Straightforwardness is not their hallmark. They can be very, they're very nice. But New Yorkers are bottom line people, and we tend to cut to the chase. So that was always interesting. So, so I've learned a lot from them, and I think some of them have learned something from me. And so that was the first time. Now, the next time I came down with my wife just to say, let's go. I want you to go see. What do you think? And we flew down. And at that time, I think that was just the time they had just found the farm. I remember Deacon Bill saying, we just found the property where we're going to build the shrine. And this was about a year and a half before we went there. So this was 95, maybe 94. And we met there and got introduced. These people were thinking of maybe coming to work for us. And mother turned away from me, grabbed my wife's hands, looked in her eyes and said, "You want to come?" And she was like, yeah, you're right. I want to come. And so that was a big moment for us, with the idea of kind of finalizing in about 6 months before we moved down. And we went to the studio, and the story I always like to tell was we were in there and Terry was talking to Mother, and I was standing there kind of with Bill and Mother and Michael Warsaw. Mike might have been there, I forget right now, but my son kept saying, "She's so beautiful, she's just so beautiful." And I was trying to figure out what he was talking about, Matt. And I realized that he was talking about Mother, and I thought, Mother's a lot of things. Beautiful was not necessarily one, especially one a child would think of. But I thought, he sees her for who she is. That was kind of my take on it. And so, it was kind of like, a reaffirmation, confirmation that regardless of the fact that this wasn't going to be easy, that this was ultimately what God was asking us to do. And as my daughter said, well, I thought we were going to Albania, so I guess Alabama isn't so bad. So.
Yes, yeah, not as drastic as Albania, but still a pretty drastic change for you professionally, for your family as well. And so, what was that like? I guess settling in, moving forward on everything. You took up as a host of a show now, one of the longest running shows on EWTN Bookmark. Anything else you want to share with us as you got into the work?
Well, obviously, I mean, it was a little bit of a culture shock. Obviously, you come from a much more New York corporate media environment, and you go to a place that's being run by a bunch of nuns, cloistered nuns. And so it's something that kind of grew sui generis out of its own, volition, and it has its kind of amorphous organization, and you're trying to figure out exactly how to make things work and how you work through the system and things, and how do you make things better without upsetting the apple cart. The way I've described it over the years is, when you turn an aircraft carrier, you have to do it slowly, otherwise the crew falls off the deck. And so, slowly we had to kind of adjust and say, how can we make more programming? How can we make the programs we're making better? How can we be more optimized our donors' money, so that we could always kid about the fact that we didn't leave. I used to tell Father Andrew Apostle, you don't let you leave until he sucked every thought out of your brain. For an airfare and a hotel, we put you up and fed you ourselves, but we'd end up with a series. You'd be on a live show, you'd do a book interview, you do Faith Matters, you do a call spot. We'd maximize our cost per minute by doing it that way, and some of those are still some of the greatest spots we have, especially like many of the old Groeschel shows and spots.
Wow, we're going to be right back with Doug Keck. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Doug Keck, President and COO of EWTN. And I've been thoroughly enjoying this episode here today with Doug. And we are in our final segment here. Down the stretch we come, but a lot of ground to cover here in this final segment. We've gotten into your early life at EWTN as you begin there. And there's about almost 30 years after that, from then until now. The floor is yours, Doug. Anything else you want to share with us today?
Well, I guess the thing I would say was it was kind of fortuitous. I mean, I think God was moving at EWTN, because I showed up, and Raymond had just showed up about a month and a half, 2 months before, Raymond Arroyo, one of my best buddies. And Jeff Cavins had just came. So, we launched The World Over that September as a monthly show. We launched Life on the Rock the following, I think, February. And then Marcus showed up on Mother's show, and Mother said, we got to do something to do with, convert stories. And, and I had seen, and Marcus actually, luckily, I had been a student of the early 90s, and I saw him give an early talk before he, one of those Friday afternoon talks, not even part of the main talks. And I had been impressed by him. And so she asked me, well, what do you think? Do you think he can do it? I said, yeah, I think he can do it, because I had seen him. And so we worked on that, where I worked with Marcus, my old pal, and we launched The Journey Home in September of 98. And what had happened with Bookmark, let me just tell that story. Actually, Raymond was going to go. We had talked about collaborating on some kind of book thing, because I always thought, we have all these people who come through as guests, but we don't have a book show. And I actually worked on something called the Book Channel for a while in New York that Mr. Dolan had done. And so we came up and said, well, it'd be nice to have an author, while they're here already. Again, I'm always looking to maximize what else can we do with somebody. And so we had said, well, how can we maximize it? And we said, well, what if all the authors came together? And it turned out OSV was having a bunch of their authors together in September of 97. And so we arranged, and Raymond was going to go to some of the interviews. He said, well, why don't you come and you can do we'll do some of the interviews together. I'll do some and you'll do some. I said, okay, great. And what happened was, while we were ready to go to that, Mother Teresa died, and Raymond had to stay behind to do the coverage for Mother Teresa's funeral. And so I ended up going up and doing Bookmark basically by myself. And then the first time we actually aired the shows we taped was in January of 98. So it's kind of funny that kind of a little bit of happenstance into the way Bookmark came about. And so we had The Journey Home, and then we were maximizing the number of shows, and we were doing Spanish shows, and we were taping German shows. And the whole idea was to be able to tape one series a week, and just shoot the shows, do the live shows, turn the sets around, be ready to shoot. So we could really populate the channel initially with new product. And then as we went along, we tried to, again, move in the direction of saying, well, we don't need as many things, but we need higher quality. And we started to move in that direction as well. Some scripted things, obviously things with reenactments, which we're doing a lot now. Somebody had suggested, why don't you ever we had done some stuff with Father Spitzer, and somebody said, he's good. And so we created Father Spitzer's Universe, which I'm the co-host with. And Father Spitzer and I've known him for 25 years. And the first time we met, we just hit it off. And when we did book interviews and when we had everything, we always would go to dinner and enjoy each other, and had a fairly good repartee. And most people say that they see that comes out on the air, and hopefully that's a positive thing. They can see that. Somebody asked me, you guys are friends, aren't you? And I said, yeah, absolutely. We're very good friends. Even though he's in California and I'm in Alabama. I mean, the original name of the show was supposed to be Faith and Reason Coast to Coast. But then we were talking about, one of the guys, I think Steve Beaumont, said, well, what about like something like Father Spitzer's Universe? But I guess not. And I said, no, that's a better title. Let's go with that. So we went with that. And so that's exciting. I think other shows that I'm excited to have, Cathedrals Across America was something we kind of created. I worked on the first ways for us to get the feeds out of Rome by marrying the Vatican radio with the TV feeds. In the early days, it was quite an undertaking to get those things. Now it's nothing. I mean, it's all over the internet. You can get anything. The other thing, Saints Alive, I was a big believer that what made Catholics special is the saints and the connection to the saints. And so, I always thought it was important to have the saints speak for themselves. So we did a bunch of spots called Saints Alive, where this is what the saint said about the Eucharist. Not what I tell you the saint said about the Eucharist, but this is what he said. And this is what he said back in, 250 AD or, the year 300. The church didn't make this stuff up last week. Okay. And I thought that was important to see that connection, kind of like the apostolic connection through the priesthood, but also through the saints as the lay people. And so those programs we did, we tried to do more with actors and things like that, like we do now Chesterton Station, which one with the idea was, well, each week Chesterton meets somebody some famous person who comes off the train and talks about the faith. Saints and Scoundrels, which Ben Weicker and I developed. Originally, it was just going to be him and the scoundrel, so to speak, but he thought, well, maybe if we added the saint in, so we added that in. And again, in a way to present the faith, to present the teachings of the faith, in a way that people could understand them, because some people are better at reading, some people want to listen, some people need it told as a story or in a play, these are different ways. And I thought it was really important over the years for a lot of young people with T-shirts from Nietzsche and stuff like that, and these other wonderful Sartre, de Beauvoir, to realize what kind of clowns these people really were, and the kind of ridiculous things they believed, actually, not the ones you see on the T-shirts. And we did that with the Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, where we kind of went after the whole ideas of what we're dealing with today, the gender agenda, Wolf in the Fold, and we just did a series on the Curé of Ars, which was shot in France. We did something on the Eucharistic martyrs of the early church, again, connecting to show to people. There were people in the early church in the first couple of 100 years who were willing to give their lives to protect the Eucharist. Well, was that because they thought it was a symbol? I don't think so.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. A lot of really great stuff there. Doug Keck is with us. Looking forward into the future, Doug, what challenges do you see Catholic media facing today, and how do you think we overcome them?
Well, I think you could say one is distribution and technology, which is, I'm a big believer and always have believed in the phrase content is king, and the truth attracts. So if you put out the truth and you don't obfuscate it too much, you'll attract people, even if it's not the most entertaining, but if it's truthful, people will see and feel it. So I think it's very important to not ape the secular media or to feel second class or somehow, how can I do things to be respected by the people in the commercial business? Trust me, most of them you don't want to be respected by. You'd hate to see who some of those people are. With that being said, the other thing is technologically, and that's one of the reasons EWTN is putting a lot into the whole idea of EWTN Plus and Next. And the Plus idea is really to build that kind of Netflix-y kind of expanded on-demand platform that allows you to have the same flexibility of acquiring Catholic material of a high quality as you would on Netflix or you would on Prime or any of these others, and be available in every platform that's available on your phone, on your smart TV. I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of these things are available just on the TV they have in their house. All they have to do is go to the apps in the smart TV and they'll find EWTN. Or they'll find other Catholic media or YouTube. And having and expanding our platform, we got over 1 million subs on YouTube. So I mean, we're growing in all of those places. You want to be, and again, the phrase that we kind of developed, and I'll take responsibility for it, EWTN's everywhere, or everywhere. The idea of trying to say to people, we are everywhere. If you want to find us, you can find us. If you're not interested, that's okay. The Lord said, and Mother said, it's not our job to convert people. That's the job of the Holy Spirit. Our job is to soak the earth in the truth.
Amen. God bless you.